Thank you very much for joining me on the Voice of Jobs. Because this Mark is the first time you join us, welcome. And for those who are coming back to us, welcome back. If you want to know more about me and podcasts, you can go to voiceofjobseekers.com. You can text me, you can write me, and all of that you can find on the voiceofjobseekers.com, as well as leaving a comment on the speak pipe button. With the new voicemail, if you will. Today's show, I want to bring you Phyllis Ramsey of Ramsey Law, who I know by following Tom Spiegel, who's been on the show in the past several times, and I've been on his show a couple of times. Tom Spiegel's an attorney who is on the East Coast, who works in unemployment law, and Phyllis also specializes in unemployment law as well as some other types of law, and she practices in the Mid-South, let's just say. Anyway, we talked a little bit about remote work and COVID-19, how a lot of the pay scale could be affected, and is there because people are going back and working locally, was there something in the law that we should know about to protect salary, or should we have an understanding of what that really is in the marketplace, as well as virus victims and taking time off, and maybe it being complicated by some other laws that are in place, like disability and the shifts in laws, and to cover a bunch of other stuff regarding it. I thought maybe you'd like to hear. We also talked, interestingly enough, since that was around the time of a lot of civil rights marching and the George Floyd protests and Breonna Taylor protests. Also want to get her thoughts about how all of this and COVID kind of mixed together and could possibly bring some interesting breakthroughs or complications in law in the future in 2021 and beyond. So I thought now maybe this might be a good chance to go back in time to look at the discussion and look at going forward, since we're going to have a changing guard here as far as our president is concerned. So thank you very much. And by the way, just trying to expedite the ebook, 421 Modern Job Search Tips 2021. Got a note from Trade Pub earlier today. They're making a move, and because of COVID-19 and how everything is changing, it's held up a lot of things, including the publishing of my free ebook, which I'll be, if you haven't signed up for it already, go to voiceofjobs.com and sign up for it. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the show with Phyllis Ramsey of Ramsey Law. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thanks. Thank you very much for joining us on the Voice of Job Seekers video series. Got a special treat today with Phyllis Ramsey of Ramsey Law. How are you?
I am great. Well, as great as we can be in a pandemic.
Yeah, that's it, and we all have to qualify it because at some point, I think everybody goes through a breakage in some way. But I want to talk with you because you are an employment law lawyer, amongst the other things that you do, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and at any time you can always let me know that I'm barking up the wrong tree. But one of the things I did want to get down to is to add a little context. Facebook talked about a couple of weeks ago that if you're living in San Francisco and you move to Iowa, which is a smaller market, we're going to cut your salary down to the market rate of that city. Um, and I was wondering how lawful or how tricky is that particular move, or should people be concerned that if you're going to be remote from now on, why not live where you want to live?
Yeah. So you said lawful and tricky. I would say it's always tricky. Anytime you're talking about cutting people's salary,
Right,
it's always
right.
tricky, but it's not necessarily unlawful as long as an employer gives you notice that your salary is going to be reduced. So they can't retroactively do it. In other words, they can't say you've been working at home since March. And
Mhm.
so we're going to go back and recoup all the money we've given you since March. But prospectively, they can, they can say, from July on or August on, if you move to a lower price market, we're going to cut your salary. And that's totally lawful. They give you notice. You have a chance as an employee to accept it or, turn it down, which probably will mean either not moving or not working for the company anymore. But it's lawful to cut salaries. And in fact, it often happens. The only time it would not be lawful, if you had an employment contract in place, for instance, that said you're going to be paid X amount for this many years, or we'll pay you X amount until 2021, 2022. Most
Mhm.
people don't have employment contracts, depending on your level. CEOs and things have them, but
Right.
it's lawful.
But people do sign at will contracts.
Not
That's not a part
necessarily.
of it.
No, not at will just means that you can be terminated for any lawful reason and that you can quit for any lawful reason. You don't really
Mhm.
have to have notice. So it's not necessarily that it's, at will. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the contract per se. In fact, most people who are at will employees do not have a contract because if you're in most states in the United States, if you don't have a contract, then you're considered at will anyway.
Right. But and just to clarify, and I know where you're coming from as far as this, but people will also get offer letters with their amounts tied to their jobs, and
Mhm.
that's not necessarily a contract.
That's not necessarily a contract. That's more notice or telling you the terms of it or just putting you on notice. Hey, we've offered you the job. We're offering it to you at $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year or $35,000 a year, but that doesn't necessarily bind them. In other words, for instance, when they make you that offer letter, that doesn't mean they will keep you on forever. You can get an offer letter on July 17th and you can still be fired on July 19th.
Right, right, and apparently that's happened through the, it's happened during the pandemic where business was going really well, and then the walls fell down.
Man, the walls fell down and they fell down fast and hard.
Yeah,
I don't think, we've heard it said before, but in no other time, I don't think, have we seen this. I hope we'll never see it again, but who knows? But it fell fast. We went from, on one day, we went from hearing about this virus.
hmm,
And if you weren't really a news junkie, I'm a news junkie. So I was keeping up with it probably since December, but
yeah,
I was more keeping up with it. Like, oh, there's this virus. It really doesn't affect us. Let's just go on with life. 2020 is going to be great. And
right,
then it went
right,
to, maybe it's a few cases here, but probably really won't affect us. And then it went from that to not only is it affecting you, I mean, I can remember where I was when I happened to be in Nashville. I split my time between Nashville and the DC area. I
hmm,
was sitting in a restaurant and my server came by. I was with friends and my server came by and said, I need to give you your check because we hear rumor that the mayor is shutting down restaurants. I was
hmm,
like, in the middle of the day, what do you know? I was like, did you all have like something happen here when it's shutting down? She's like, no, the coronavirus. And like, whoa. So, and I still, even then, I think all of us were a little naive. I remember then even thinking like, oh, it'll probably last what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Be good for me to save some money, stop going to happy hour so much. And
right.
here we are, what, 4 or 5 months later?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've healthcare professionals in my family, so I got to hear some things firsthand
Mm-hmm.
about what it looked like and what it felt like, and this was going to be very serious.
Yeah.
One family member works for the state, and so she really knew exactly where to listen, which was great because one of the better resources in the country at that particular time was our mayor and our governor, who was
Mm-hmm.
right there out front, eh, on a daily basis, saying that this is how it's escalating and this is
Yeah.
how it's looking. And I think that goes to a lot of where people may decide to listen to one source or one way of getting news, and not really understanding the whole scope as it relates to people didn't expect to affect their career the way it did.
Absolutely. I think people thought it would be like the warnings we usually get every year about the flu, or
Yeah.
about, any other thing. Or, if you travel a lot, I travel a lot and I travel internationally. So, when I go to certain places and we have to get, I think a few years ago, I had to get my yellow fever vaccine updated.
Hmm.
And, I've dealt with the malaria pills and things before.
Hmm.
So even though you deal with those, they're really not a reality. It's kind of in the back of your head, like, oh, okay, I'm going on this international trip, got to get my yellow fever shot. But you
Right.
don't really expect yellow fever to take over your life. And
Right.
I think that's what it was like. As you said, we had little clues. I can remember I went to dinner with a client probably the last week of February, first week of March, and I'm a germaphobe.
Yeah.
And I pulled up for dinner and I beat the client there, and there's a convenience store close by. And I said, oh, I don't have my hand sanitizer. And I went into the store to buy hand sanitizer and it was sold out. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, I thought I was the only germaphobe. Like usually when I would buy hand sanitizer, I would buy 5 and 6 at a time. And I remember asking the clerk, like, do you have any in the back or have you just not stocked? And the clerk said, for some reason, everybody's buying it. I
Hmm.
think it's because of that little virus they're talking about on TV. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And, 2 weeks later, here
Yeah.
we are. We were
Yes.
in the condition we're in now.
Yeah. Well, you kind of segue very naturally, of course, into want to hit on a little bit about medical privacy in a little bit and how that's affecting people in ways yet that I don't think we've yet to see. But um, does an employer who may be anticipating and complies and wonder what the future is going to look like, does an employer, if they have a worker that ends up with COVID, are they able or should allow or should open up about what happened with that employee, or maybe not that employee? Maybe there's medical the laws protecting people's privacy, but like, let's say there are several people that might have gotten COVID. Are they supposed to say something about the employee, or that people have been exposed and they may not have known it? What would be the right way that employers and employees particularly would be protected?
Yeah, so there are certain privacy rights that employees enjoy under FMLA and under
Hmm.
ADA that have not changed. So, for instance, if you ever asked for reasonable accommodations or needed to take off for medical reasons under FMLA, your medical history was supposed to be private anyway.
Hmm.
This pandemic is considered what we call a direct threat to the safety and welfare of so many of us. So if somebody on the job tests positive for coronavirus, the employer does have an obligation to say that, we've had someone test positive for it. You don't have to say it was Phyllis or if it was Mark, but
Right.
you do have an obligation to let people know. And that's what the guidance that most employers are given now is to let people know that there has been a positive case,
Hmm.
not necessarily the person's name. Of course, we all know that if you work somewhere and say, especially if you work somewhere that's maybe a small company, it's 20 employees, and your
Right.
employer comes out the next day and say somebody's tested positive, and Mark is the only person who doesn't show up for work.
Right. Right. Right.
We probably know it's you, but the employer does have some obligation. We've seen this recently as things have opened up. I've been to a few places recently or walked by places, and I'll see a sign on the door, and it's mysterious. We're
Hmm.
sorry. We will be back open in 2 days. And
Hmm.
we all pretty much know that means the deep clean, that
Right,
either an
right, right, right,
employee or customer
right,
tested. But yes, you still have to maintain the employee's privacy, but it's a balancing act. You also have to keep others safe too. So you can't be negligent and just not tell anybody. And then I also think, depending on the industry, that employers should probably go a step further and with the cleaning, with the details that you would give about where the person was. So for instance, if it's a medical facility or something, or
mhm,
a area with high touch areas, you should probably go a little deeper and probably say, there may have been exposure on floor 5,
mhm.
around cubicles 5 through 10, or however your building is set up.
Right. Well, here's a caveat to all of that.
Mhm.
People are interviewing and they're actively interviewing. Some are remote, some are actually having to go to a facility to where, to a physical facility. Are there anything that, is there anything that uh, a job seeker or a candidate, a potential candidate, should ask about how an employer has responded to COVID or COVID conditions and COVID situations?
Oh, absolutely. I think right now, if I was interviewing right now, I would definitely ask, what has been your response to COVID-19? Meaning, how have you kept employees safe?
Hmm.
If you've had any cases of employees testing positive, what were the measures that you took after? Did you just tell people? Did you clean after? So I would definitely ask those questions. And if the employer does not want to answer those questions, I can't get I know it's a tough time for so many people, so I know people have to work now, but I would seriously consider working for an employer, or seriously second guess working for an employer who didn't want to share that information.
Right, right.
I think at this time, employers have to be open and transparent about how they're dealing with it. Do you provide PPE to your employees, or is it on them to provide it? If you do, what PPE do you provide? I
Right.
think those are the new questions. Years ago when we were interviewing, people would say, ask about vacation time or ask about work-life balance. I
Yeah.
think the question now is, how has your company responded to COVID-19?
Yes, absolutely. There are times when I wonder, there are times I hear lots of stories. And one story that I've heard is that the employer didn't say anything about certain employees that were victims, not fatal victims, but they were, of course, they came down with COVID, and you heard it through the grapevine, and you kind of wonder, does the employer care about me and my welfare? Because if I was exposed as an employee, then I would want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are remiss if you do not say it. I was personally exposed to in the early day in March. I think um, I was exposed to one friend who had the virus, and then two
Hmm.
clients who had been in for meetings early March, had no symptoms. They didn't even know. Thankfully, they contacted me after they were diagnosed and said, hey, one had been in like on a Thursday, was diagnosed. So like the next Monday, I got the call on Monday evening or Tuesday. And
Right.
I appreciate it. Of course, it's scary, but I appreciated it. And I can't imagine, that was a situation where it was personal friendships and my clients, but I cannot imagine working for someone who did not take those steps to inform you. I
Hmm.
mean, this is really a life and death situation.
True.
This isn't just allergy season. This isn't even the chicken pox. And obviously, some people have probably died from chicken pox, but usually you get chicken pox, you're down for a week or so, and you're back up. I mean, this is a life and death, highly contagious virus that we still don't know a lot about.
Right.
And I think it would just be remiss. Again, I hesitate to tell people, well, just quit your job or you shouldn't work there, because I'm in nobody's shoes. I don't know what people's financial situation, what their professional situation, what their work situation is. But I would seriously think about working for an employer who just ignored it. So you got 3 people absent. We probably know why they're absent.
Right.
And you haven't said anything. Again, don't breach the employee's privacy and say, Mark has it, the virus, or Phyllis has it, but at least say, we've had some employees who've tested positive. These are
Yeah.
the steps that we've taken.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard frustration where people were missing for 3 or 4 weeks. That's the only reason why they're missing. Nobody,
Yeah.
people aren't taking vacations around this time.
Right. Nobody's flying off to an island because nobody wants us in their country right now.
So I guess maybe I wasn't even planning to go down this road. So are people going to have to navigate the difference between moral and ethical reasoning? And maybe this could end up somewhere when people are, or when employers are not uh, being responsive to at least warning employees that someone or in some way come in contact with COVID?
I'm sorry, say that again. Repeat that again.
People are going to have to, if there's like a chain of reaction that people are constantly becoming in contact with a particular employer who doesn't announce it, then does it become an ethical, can it become a lawsuit is in essence what I'm asking, if an employer is neglecting to create a safer space and some transparency.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think as we go down the line, we'll see more lawsuits. One thing that you've probably heard a lot about now recently is that there's been some movement to enact laws that will limit an employer's liability,
Right.
for employees
Yeah, I've heard that.
contracting
Yeah.
COVID
Yep.
on the job.
Especially in sports.
And even with that though, again, we know so little about this disease. So even as things are opening back up or were opening back up before we had this surge, even
Right.
with situations like that, so much is unknown about this virus that it would probably be almost impossible to pin down where you got the virus.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think we're going to see at least some attempts at cases saying, hey, my employer knew that people have been exposed, that I was probably exposed at work. I do think we're going to see some cases. How successful they will be, I can't say, because as in the legal world, you have to be very specific in negligence cases about who caused the damage. And I think one of the things with opening back up is that people, we talk about, oh, you may be scared to go back to work. And that probably does raise your risk. But even the steps you take to get back to work raise your risk. So if you have to take public transportation, right, that raises your risk. If you're in a building that's a very populated building, that raises your risk. So I think one of the issues is going to be we're going to have trouble pinpointing exactly where someone got it. But I definitely think the cases are definitely coming. I mean, I get calls every day from people saying, I don't want to go back to work because I heard that this coworker has it, or they posted on Facebook they had it, but they came back to work, So I definitely think we're going to have that. Or as we're all doing now, we're panicking. So we hear someone cough, or if someone posts a vague message on Facebook, pray for me, we all assume, oh my God, they have it. So I think we're going to have to contend with all of this in this new normal that we're in.
Yeah. I think, it's very interesting where people are coming from with this. When you get questions, sometimes I'm even asked about legally I'm going to say I'm not an attorney, but but one of the scariest things is that we're going to start seeing some the boundaries of work change forever, perhaps.
Yes.
In the way, not just in the fact, and I want to touch on 1-2 things about work, remote work before you go, but that aspect of, as people are responding to this by working remote, there are other ways that people can be exposed. People, like Chicago, supposedly the story is people got the whole batch got exposed because of a funeral and a birthday party here in Chicago. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any work stories like that is exposed because of a required or mandated work
right.
gathering. So I'm just, that's, I think those are important things to at least start entertaining
I
while we have
definitely
that
think,
shifting.
and the nature of work that you do, I've told people tongue in cheek, but still definitely believe it, that I'm not really getting calls from CEOs or owners of businesses scared to go back. Most of those people you can isolate at work. Most CEOs have their own offices. Most high level people have their own offices. But there's some nature of work where just by the nature of your work, you have to be in close contact with others. So I'm thinking of those jobs with close in contact cubicles. In the workplace, we were all so excited, or the big trend in recent years has been these open workspaces with just these cool spaces with just desk and the hot desk where you don't really
Right,
have an
right,
assigned desk, just sit down. I mean, we
right.
were just going crazy over that in the last few years, in these cool offices with just tables or
Hmm.
stand-up desks where you just stand beside somebody breathing on them all day.
Right.
And now everything we thought was cool is actually a liability.
Yes. Yes. So people should be at least keep their eyes open as far
Yeah,
as not just where you're going to go in your career, but how you're going to work, and is that going to be feasible for you in the future
absolutely.
as a safety measure, not particularly because of a career advancement. Uh,
Absolutely.
and having come across CEOs throughout the discussions I have with folks, many of them are concerned with what the future of work will actually look like, especially for themselves, because now their meetings, things that they're able to account for is meetings and uh, um, one-on-ones, and having this dominion is going to change because people are going to be much more much more of a consultant mode than they are going to be a worker bee. That a lot
Absolutely.
of it's going to be very much more independent driven than it is going to be, that you're waiting for somebody to tell you what to do.
Yes.
So that would bring an extra discussion. But one or two last questions, and then I'm going to let
Okay.
you go because I know you got things going on. But but the fun part of all of this is having to deal with some of the issues that we talked about how people are starting to merge lanes between being sick and disability as
Mhm.
well, uh, which I'm sure that might be another tricky question on what's going to be, what will disability look like overall, perhaps, not just because of COVID, but because of uh, potentially that what will happen for the long term. Disability laws are disability, but could we see that kind of morph and be shaped a little bit different, because that might be an acceptable part of being sick.
Yeah, I think we're going to see so many changes and shifts in disability law and what is a disability.
Yeah.
Again, that so much is unknown about this virus, but almost from the beginning, they've told us, that people of a certain age are more vulnerable.
Hmm.
People with certain underlying conditions are more vulnerable. So one of the questions we have now, and a question I get a lot from potential clients that call in is, hey, I have asthma. Is
Hmm.
that enough for me to ask for a reasonable accommodation?
Right.
Whereas last year, this time, they may not have needed an accommodation, may have been fine for them to go into work. It's not strenuous work or physical labor work or anything, but now because of this underlying condition, is it a right to ask for an accommodation if you don't necessarily have an underlying condition, but somebody you live with
Hmm.
has an underlying condition? So I think we're going to see the change on that a lot. From the people I know who've had the virus, this thing lasts a long time.
It does.
It lasts. I know somebody who was diagnosed probably the second week in March. They were tested probably every week since then. They just tested negative,
Hmm.
but they still have a lingering cough. Still not really the labored breathing anymore, but you can tell when you talk to them, you can tell. And so even things like that, this isn't where, we used to in flu season maybe be used to somebody needing a week off or maybe even 2 weeks. this virus is different. And so I think it's going to change our perceptions of what is a disability, what is being perceived as having a disability, because our other protections under the law have not disappeared where they're not supposed to disappear. Right. So, if you live in a neighborhood where the hot spots, as they're calling the red zones or wherever, if you live in those spots, what if your employer is saying, oh, I don't want this person working because they live in this zip code, right, or they are of this race. The numbers have not lied. This thing has just decimated Black and brown people. But having said that, employers cannot say because you're Black or brown, you cannot work here on the basis of your race, that you may be more vulnerable if you get the virus, they can't discriminate against you on that. So I think those are still things we have to see.
And you were going down the lane I was particularly going down, is that because of studies that have been done and throughout time, once you hit 40, you're told you're in a risk range because you're Black and you're brown, you're likely to be a diabetic, high blood pressure, asthma, COPD, all these different underlying conditions, and it's rare that you don't. And they show you statistics that 2 out of 3 Black people of color, etc., are subjected to having those underlying conditions. So likely, more than, let's say, the white candidate, and you have the Black candidate. The white candidate has a different MO, a medical MO, than the Black one, and therefore there's no way to gauge discrimination based on that. But that's kind of dirtying up the pot a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to have to start paying more attention to those implicit statements, those implicit actions, because they always won't be explicit. For the most part, I do not think that an employer or a hiring manager will say, hey, because you're Black, you'll probably get it, so we can't hire you. But there may be implicit things that say that.
Well, some of them, no matter what, some of them are going to ask, hey, are you a diabetic? Because they're going.
And you're not supposed to ask that.
They're not supposed to ask.
Right.
But it's interesting in some states, it's, there's legal versus you're not supposed to. And
you're not supposed to ask, but as I always tell clients, I'm also not supposed to speed on certain streets, and I do. I didn't mean to, tell off on myself, but
exactly. And not again, there's no real technique to get past it, but I think if you are a person of color, you're a Black person, you're taking a little bit more time to look at a company to see what is their MO, and you can kind of tell within the company, and there's certain signs where you can tell, okay, more than likely it's not going to be favorable for me to work here, but I see this company is much more, they're much more proactive and making accommodations and giving clear statements about what they will do. So, we can merge in all kinds of lanes here, but ultimately, people should start be a little bit more present to watch those kind of statements, because employers are thinking about those things now. They're not waiting for laws. They're thinking about, where's the loophole.
Absolutely. And I think that, you have to, this is probably a topic for another day, another show, but right. If we have not recognized that race is at the center of this thing, I've heard so many people say that the virus does not discriminate. The virus may not discriminate, but the people treating us for the virus may discriminate. The people who we have to work for during this virus may discriminate. Our care that we get in this virus discriminates. And if you try to leave the race angle out of this, you have not really looked at this virus, whether it's the race angle of the industries that have been impacted by this virus, whether it's the race angle of the people who didn't, you had people at the beginning saying, well, it's not too bad that we're shutting down. You can just dip in the savings. There is a demographic of people who have no savings. So right. What are they going to dip into? Right. When it first came out, they were saying, well, just social distance, stay 6 feet away. There are households that do not have the space to socially distance. There are households when you get on a Zoom call. I also teach, I'm an adjunct professor. And
Mhm.
as we move to Zoom, some of my students, one of my students for the last week since March would take the Zoom from her car because she said, it's too many people in my house. You know,
Yeah.
I will not be able to get on this. So if we don't look at the race aspect of this the same way that we have to look at the race aspect in all employment law, we've missed a big part of this virus. We cannot analyze it. We definitely cannot analyze how employment works in this. You know, for instance, employers are allowed to take temperatures now because this is a direct threat. The EEOC has given guidance and saying, yes, you can take temperatures, but what you can't do is discriminate. So you can't just take only Black people's temperature when they
Right.
walk in.
Right.
And if your job is doing that, or you know of a job who is doing that, again, I hate to, I'm so conscious of privilege. So I hate to tell people, well, just don't work there or find a new job, because I know that's not easy for anybody, but you got to take a serious look. If that is how employers are treating people, how have they treated not only their employees during this situation, but how have they treated people who look like you during this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to think about that before something happens. You know, on a personal level, when this first came up, I started looking at my medical providers and saying, what kind of treatment have they given me in the past? Do they understand who I am as a person? Do they understand my background? Because if I get diagnosed, I want to have a fighting chance.
Right.
And I think we have to do that with the employers as well.
Well, I think too, the other side of it is that Black people, people of color, got to be a little bit more vocal about the injustice of how they're being treated, so that other people will understand that, you know, I may work here, but doesn't mean I enjoy working here or that I am being taken care of. This is maybe the best spot for me right now. And this is why I'm working here. So, yeah, it's interesting times, and it causes for very interesting changes.
Interesting and devastating times.
Yes.
So much that we have to think about, so much that we have to do to protect ourselves, not only from this virus, but from so many things that have become a byproduct of this virus. There are just so many things that 8 months ago, 9 months ago, we would not have thought that we must think of. But you're right. You have to be vocal. You have to push the issue, and you have to stay informed. And you said this at the beginning. Where's your information coming from?
Yeah.
You know, where is your information coming from, and how are you processing that information? You know, there was this rumor out, I'm sure you heard it when it first started, is that Black people can't get it. Oh, Black people can't get it. I remember everybody was saying that in March. And then as soon as they started putting victims in the paper, I was thinking, oh, these folks look like me. Like everybody who's dying from this, every victim from this looks like me. What is going on with this virus that they're saying does not discriminate?
Well, you know, fortunately, we have a mayor that's like right out in front of this thing, and she just put it out there. There was significantly many more Black people who were victims of this than any other race,
and continue to be, and not only from the actual virus, but from the loss of jobs from this virus, from the loss of resources from this virus, from, you know, the loss of homes from this virus, just the overall loss of protections. It is going to hit a certain segment of this population so much harder. It is hitting a certain segment of this population so much harder. I think about the people who served me in restaurants, people who made sure my hotel room was clean. I always tell my students that these are the invisible professions. These are the professions that make us live a good life, but we really never think about them. We go to a hotel and we come back at the end of the day and our room is clean, and you don't really ever think that somebody, probably a Black or brown woman, made sure that room was sparkling. The food appears on your table at a restaurant, and we don't really stop to think that most of our servers in restaurants look a certain way. And that is who, from an employment standpoint, this thing has hit so hard.
Yeah, we can go in all kinds of directions with this, you know, but, you know, we get the cues from the news, and whether it doesn't matter what channel you watch,
Hmm.
The masketeers or the unmasketeers. There's always an insinuation of some type where, that Black people are at the butt end of a lot of this. So that makes all the difference in the world, and what you hear and what you don't hear. So, Phyllis Ramsey, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I finally get to be in the star chair on this show.
Yes, you sure do. And I've
Hope
been
it's not
trying to,
the last time.
yep. And just for context, I have utilized Phyllis's expertise before in an article that I wrote for Pay Scale a while back. So it's not, I'm not unfamiliar. I've been watching a whole long time. Now I've just been able to get around the show.
Look, it
Uh,
took a pandemic and me being in the house for us to be able to connect.
Yes, yes, yes. So how can people, what they want to know more about you and what you do and your services, how should
Yes,
they get in touch with you?
definitely reach out. Facebook and Instagram, it is Ramsey Law. And it's just RAMBSYLAW. Don't even ask. It's pronounced Ramsey, but it's spelled RAMBSY. So just Ramsey Law on Instagram, on Facebook, or just hit us up at info@ramseylaw.com. We are here, not going anywhere in this pandemic, so I am really here. This is Ramsey Law right now.
Well, again, thank you, and thank the rest of you for watching. And you all have a great week. Thanks very much.
Yes, be safe.